In South Carolina, officials are on the hunt for 42 rhesus macaque monkeys, still roaming free after escaping from a research facility in Yemassee. The breakout happened Wednesday when a staff member at Alpha Genesis, a company that breeds primates for medical research, inadvertently left an enclosure door unlocked. Most of the monkeys remain near the facility, with some even seen interacting from a distance with employees. Authorities are monitoring the area closely, but they've assured the public that these small 7-pound monkeys pose no health risks. The monkeys, all young females, have not been exposed to any medical testing, according to police and company officials. Yemassee Police Chief noted that while the monkeys are skittish, they're harmless and are being lured back with food and treats. Alpha Genesis has deployed traps and is using thermal cameras to assist in the roundup. Officials continue to urge people to keep clear of the area to avoid alarming the monkeys, but sightings should be reported immediately. Efforts to bring the animals back to safety are ongoing, and officials are determined to return all escapees to the facility.
The text came through at midnight, and it was short enough to make Mike's heart skip.
Big payday.
It was Evan, of course. He was always stirring up some scheme or another, and big payday could mean anything with him. But tonight, for some reason, Mike's fingers lingered over his phone, his dad's voice echoing faintly in the back of his mind.
A big payday is like a shooting star, kid. You see it, you reach for it, no questions asked. It might be gone before you get another chance.
He knew it was risky thinking. His dad had a knack for saying things that got him in trouble. But for Mike, it wasn't just about the money. It was about proving he could still pull off something big, make something of himself the way his dad had always hinted he should. The phone vibrated again. A second message from Evan.
$2,000 per monkey, no questions asked.
He called him immediately.
You're serious about this? $2,000?
Dead serious.
Evan replied, his voice cool clipped.
Meridian Biolabs. They're paying for every one of those monkeys that escaped from Alpha Genesis. They don't care how we get them, just that we bring them in.
Mike's mind raced. $2,000 per monkey. Just a few could cover his rent for months, maybe even give him a chance to fix up that old truck he was too embarrassed to drive anymore. And then his dad's words were there again, low and encouraging.
Grab your chances. Don't let fear mess with your life.
What about the cops?
He asked, trying to steady his voice.
They're all over the news, telling people to stay away from the monkeys. And Meridian's arrival, won't we get in trouble?
Evan scoffed, his tone light, almost mocking.
Come on, Mike. You think the cops care? They're just saying that so people don't get in the way. Meridian's playing it close to the chest, but they're serious. They have cash, waiting for anyone who delivers.
It was risky. He knew that. But it was hard not to feel the pull, the adrenaline of it, the memory of his dad's voice egging him on.
All right,
he said slowly, letting out a breath.
But we keep this low-key. No slipping up.
They met the next night, right where the woods met the edge of town. The air was thick, humid, like the woods were already warning them to stay away. Evan looked thrilled, practically buzzing with excitement, his gear packed and ready. Mike felt a twinge of doubt, but Evan's energy was contagious.
Ever think you'd be out here catching monkeys for cash?
Evan asked, flashing him a grin.
Not exactly my dream job,
Mike muttered, though he couldn't deny the thrill creeping into his own veins.
Feels more like one of my dad's tall tales. He'd have gone nuts over a deal like this.
Your dad, huh?
Evan's gaze flickered with interest, but his tone was cautious.
He was big on this kind of thing, wasn't he?
Mike shrugged, deflecting.
He'd always talk about a big payday, you know? Said it was something you had to reach for, even if it meant going out on a limb.
He paused, feeling a bit silly admitting it.
Guess I'm finally taking his advice.
Evan chuckled.
Well, here's to your old man, then. Let's make him proud.
They started into the woods, flashlights piercing the darkness in thin, wavering beams. The forest felt alive, every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig amplifying the tension. Mike gripped his flashlight tighter, his dad's words echoing alongside each step, even as the shadows grew deeper and more oppressive. They hadn't been walking long when they saw it, a shadow darting between the trees. Too big to be a raccoon, too fast to be human. They froze, their lights darting in the direction of the movement.
That's gotta be one of them,
Evan whispered, his voice edged with excitement. Mike nodded, trying to control his breathing.
Yeah, but it's gone now.
We'd need to be quick if we want to get anywhere close.
They continued, quieter now, senses on high alert. Every so often they'd catch another glimpse. A flash of fur, a pair of eyes glowing from the underbrush, and every time that metallic scent would return, faint but unmistakable, setting Mike's nerves on edge. After a while they stumbled upon something else. Claw marks on a tree, deep and fresh. Mike ran his fingers over the grooves, feeling a shiver crawl up his spine.
This is something else,
he murmured. His dad had hunted enough to know animal marks, but nothing had ever looked quite like this. Evan glanced over, unbothered, giving him a teasing grin.
Don't tell me you're getting spooked already. Your dad would be disappointed.
Mike scowled, bristling at the jab.
I'm fine. Just saying, this isn't what I expected.
Evan shrugged it off.
It's just claw marks. Probably a raccoon or something else out here hunting too. Come on, don't go soft on me now.
Mike stayed silent, his mind racing. He'd spent enough time in these woods to know raccoons didn't make marks like that. But he didn't say anything. He couldn't. He didn't want to look weak, not after he'd made this choice, after he'd decided to reach for the big payday his dad had always talked about. They moved on, setting up traps, scattering bait along the path they'd marked. The forest felt like it was growing darker, the air thicker, almost like the trees themselves were closing in around them, swallowing up the slivers of moonlight.
Maybe we're in over our heads,
Mike muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure if he meant Evan to hear.
Over our heads?
Evan glanced at him, a strange glint in his eyes.
This is a payday, Mike. Don't chicken out now.
Mike clenched his jaw.
I'm not, I didn't think it'd feel like this, that's all.
What did you expect?
Evan shot back, his voice edged with impatience.
A walk in the park? This is our way out. Here it is. You want to back out? Go ahead, but I'm staying.
The words stung more than Mike wanted to admit. But his dad's voice was there, echoing through the fear and the hesitation, urging him on. So he kept walking, forcing himself to ignore the dread creeping up his spine. They stumbled across an old trap, rusted and bloody, a relic from someone else's attempt to hunt in these woods. It looked too fresh, too deliberate. Mike felt his stomach twist as he examined it, but Evan's eyes gleamed with anticipation.
Looks like someone else thought there was money to be made here.
They pushed deeper into the forest, each step an act of defiance against the warnings piling up around them. And when they finally stumbled upon an abandoned syringe, half buried in the dirt, Mike felt a chill that went bone deep. He picked it up, holding it gingerly.
You think this is from Meridian?
Evan's smile was sharp, predatory.
Does it matter? They're paying for results, not questions. Let's keep moving.
And as they walked deeper into the woods, the silence thickened, and the darkness swallowed their words, leaving them alone with nothing but the ghosts of their choices and the lure of money pulling them forward. They'd laid out traps along the narrowest trails they could find, scattering fruit and peanut butter as bait, hoping it would attract something. The night was inky black, the kind that seemed to absorb sound. It made every snap of a twig feel like a scream in the dark. Evan was crouched by a snare, adjusting the rope and muttering to himself. Mike watched him, the tension between them growing with every second. It had been building ever since they stepped into these woods, an unspoken friction that Mike couldn't shake.
Think this'll actually work?
Mike asked, his voice a low whisper. Evan didn't look up.
If you'd stop asking and let me focus, it might.
Mike's jaw tightened. The frustration simmered, but he held it in. It wasn't just Evan's attitude, it was this whole thing. The feeling that something was watching them hadn't gone away. If anything, it was stronger, creeping up his spine like cold fingers. They moved from trap to trap, checking and resetting them. Hours ticked by, the silence weighing heavier, the night growing colder. And then, movement. A shadow darted across the path ahead, disappearing into the trees.
That's one,
Evan whispered, excitement lighting up his face. He moved quickly, motioning for Mike to follow, and they slipped through the trees, their flashlights off to avoid alerting whatever was out there. As they crept closer, Mike caught a glimpse, a small shape crouched by one of the traps, its fur almost invisible in the darkness. Evan held out an arm, signaling for Mike to stay back. He took another step forward, hands ready to grab. But before he could reach it, the monkey turned, and for a moment, Mike swore he saw something in its eyes, something more than animal, something calculating. The monkey didn't run. It stared at them, unmoving as if sizing them up. And then it let out a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down Mike's spine. The air felt suddenly thick, heavy with a faint metallic smell that made his stomach turn.
Why is it just sitting there?
Mike whispered, his voice barely audible.
Who cares?
Evan's voice was laced with impatience.
It's practically gift wrapping itself for us.
He took another step forward, reaching out. But as his hand moved closer, the monkey bolted, vanishing into the darkness with a speed that seemed almost unnatural. Mike's heart was pounding, an uneasy sensation settling over him.
That wasn't normal,
he said, the words slipping out before he could stop himself. Evan shot him a glare.
You're being paranoid. We just need to be quicker next time. Come on, let's check the other traps.
They kept moving, but the ease, the confidence from earlier was gone. Now every rustle of leaves, every flicker of movement felt like a warning. Mike's senses were on high alert, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. They approached another trap, a makeshift cage they'd fashioned out of sticks and rope, but when they got there, it wasn't empty. A monkey was inside, pacing back and forth, its small form barely visible in the shadows.
Finally,
Evan muttered, moving toward the cage. He bent down, reaching for the latch, but stopped suddenly, his hand hovering in midair. Mike noticed it too. A strange smell filling the air, sharp and metallic, clinging to the inside of his nose, making his head feel light. The monkey stopped pacing, fixing its eyes on them. And then slowly, it began making that same low, guttural noise. The smell grew stronger, and Mike's vision blurred. His legs felt weak, his muscles sluggish, as if something was wrapping around his brain, squeezing the air out. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come.
What's happening?
Evan's voice was strained, panicked. Mike's head spun, the world tilting as his knees buckled. He stumbled, grabbing onto a tree for support, his fingers numb, unresponsive. He looked over at Evan, whose face was twisted with confusion and fear. It hit him then. This wasn't some natural response. This was intentional. The monkey wasn't just watching them. It was doing this. It was in control.
We need to go.
Mike managed to gasp, each word a struggle. Evan's face hardened, a mix of anger and terror.
You're giving up now? When we're this close?
We're not close to anything.
Mike snapped.
These aren't just animals. They're, I don't know, something else. You saw the way it looked at us? It knows what it's doing.
Fine. We take this one and get out. One is all we need.
Mike didn't want to argue. He just wanted to get out, to escape the thick, suffocating air, the feeling that something was pressing down on him, watching his every move. He nodded, more out of desperation than agreement, and they moved toward the cage together. But the monkey didn't flinch. It sat there still as stone, its eyes following them, unblinking, as if daring them to come closer. Evan hesitated, his hand hovering over the latch.
Why is it just sitting there?
Mike didn't respond. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, that this creature was leading them exactly where it wanted. Finally, Evan pulled the latch, opening the cage. But the moment he did, the monkey darted out, leaping onto a nearby branch, chittering softly as it looked down at them. And then, one by one, more shadows appeared in the trees around them. Small shapes moving in silence, their eyes glinting in the dark.
We're surrounded.
Mike breathed, his heart pounding.
Don't panic. They're just animals. They can't do anything to us.
But even as he said it, his voice shook. The metallic smell returned, stronger this time, filling the air with a thick, nauseating heaviness. Mike felt his muscles stiffen, his mind clouding, like something was seeping into his skin, numbing him from the inside out.
We need to leave. We gotta go now,
he said, his voice slurred, barely a whisper. Evan took a step back, his face pale, his movements slow, like he was wading through thick mud. The monkeys stayed where they were, watching, silent, a strange intelligence gleaming in their eyes. At that moment, Mike realized the truth. They weren't the hunters here. They were the prey.
Run! We need to get away now! Run!
Evan didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the monkeys, his face frozen in a mask of fear and disbelief. Mike tried to pull him back, but his arm felt heavy, unresponsive, his muscles refusing to obey. The monkeys moved closer, the metallic scent intensifying, and Mike felt his vision dim, his thoughts growing hazy. They were trapped, helpless, and he knew this wasn't just a simple capture mission. They'd walked into something far darker, something they couldn't escape. Darkness around them deepened, the forest swallowing them whole as the realization set in. They'd underestimated the creatures, ignored every warning, and now the tables had turned. The monkeys watched them, silent, unblinking, as if waiting for the final move. The night air hung heavy with the metallic scent, thick and suffocating, wrapping around Mike like a vice. His limbs were sluggish, his vision blurred, and his mind struggled to focus as he felt his muscles begin to lock up. The monkeys were closing in, their dark eyes gleaming with a malevolent intelligence that made him feel like prey. Every instinct told him to run, but his body refused to obey.
I can't move.
Evan's voice was a raspy whisper laced with panic. Mike tried to reply, but his throat felt paralyzed, his words trapped inside him. The monkeys crept closer, their movements unnervingly quiet, their eyes assessing, watching him with an awareness that went far beyond mere animal instinct. But then, as if summoned, distant voices echoed through the trees. Shouts, laughter, the snap of branches underfoot. Flashlights sliced through the darkness, and Mike could just make out the figures of a few other locals, lured in by the rumor of Meridian's payout. They called to each other, their excitement clear as they discussed the reward, oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows. The newcomers' flashlights swept over Mike and Evan, frozen in place, surrounded by the dark shapes of the monkeys.
Hey, over here! They've got them surrounded!
One of them shouted, his voice tinged with eagerness. The monkeys' heads whipped toward the intruders, their eyes narrowing, and in an instant the air shifted. Mike felt the metallic scent intensify, sharper, more menacing. The creatures had been on the edge of aggression before, holding back. But now they attacked. The monkeys launched themselves into the group, a dark, frenzied mass of teeth and claws. Screams filled the air as the newcomers fell under the assault, their flashlights tumbling to the ground, casting erratic beams of light across the chaos. Blood splattered against the leaves, and Mike watched in horror, still half paralyzed as the monkeys moved with deadly precision, attacking with a relentless fury that left no room for escape. Evan's breathing grew shallow, his eyes wide as he watched the carnage unfold. He tried to move, his fingers twitching, his gaze flicking to Mike, desperate, pleading.
Please, we have to get out of here.
Mike felt the weight of helplessness crash over him, his mind screaming for him to do something, anything. But his body was still stiff, sluggish. He couldn't run, he couldn't fight. All he could do was watch as one of the monkeys turned its attention back to them, its gaze locking onto Evan. The creature leapt, its dark form colliding with Evan, knocking him to the ground. Mike managed a strangled gasp as the monkey's claws tore into his friend, raking across his chest and face with merciless precision. Blood sprayed across the ground, Evan's screams echoing through the trees, raw and animalistic, before they faded into gurgling silence. And then, stillness. The monkeys scattered, disappearing into the trees as quickly as they had come, leaving behind a scene of carnage. The clearing was strewn with the bodies of the intruders, blood pooling in the dirt, the smell of iron thick in the air. Mike forced himself to move, his muscles weak but regaining control, and he crawled over to where Evan lay, his heart pounding with dread.
Evan, no.
Mike whispered, his voice barely more than a breath as he took in the sight of his friend's lifeless body, his face pale, his eyes staring blankly at the night sky. Blood stained his shirt, his skin, pooling beneath him in dark, inky patches. A sickening wave of grief and guilt washed over Mike, each breath heavier than the last. This was his fault. He'd pushed for the money, ignored every warning. His best friend was dead, and he had only himself to blame. Evan's fingers twitched. Mike froze, his pulse thundering in his ears, his mind scrambling to understand what he was seeing. He told himself it was a trick of the light, a final reflex, something that happened when a body shut down. But then Evan's arm moved, jerking upward, his chest heaving with a shallow, rattling breath.
Evan?
Mike whispered, horror twisting his voice. He leaned in, reaching out a hand, almost hopeful. But then Evan's head snapped to the side, his eyes open and lifeless, his face contorted into a grotesque mask of rage. His mouth parted and a low, guttural growl escaped his lips, a sound that was nothing human, nothing alive. Evan's body twisted, rising from the ground in a stiff, unnatural movement, his limbs jerking as if pulled by invisible strings. Blood dripped from his open wounds, and his eyes, once so familiar, were empty, glassy, filled with a hunger that sent a bolt of terror straight through Mike's core.
No, this can't be happening.
Mike stumbled backward, his heart pounding as Evan, or what used to be Evan, took a shuffling step toward him, his movements slow but relentless, a grotesque imitation of life.
Bro, it's me. Bro, it's Mike.
He shouted, desperation lacing his voice, but there was no flicker of recognition, no sign of the friend he'd known, only the hollow, ravenous stare, the twisted grin that spread across Evan's blood-streaked face. The thing that had once been Evan let out a snarl, a broken, gurgling sound, and lunged forward, its hands clawing at the air, reaching for Mike with an unnatural strength. Mike stumbled back, his pulse racing, his mind reeling as he realized that this was no longer his friend. Evan, no, the creature, moved with a singular focus, driven by something primal, something hungry. It didn't speak, didn't pause. Its movements a relentless march forward, intent on one thing. In a blind panic, Mike scrambled to his feet, his body finally responding, his instincts screaming for him to run. He turned and sprinted, branches snapping against his face, roots threatening to trip him as he tore through the forest. Evan's shambling, relentless form close behind, following him with an eerie silence broken only by the snap of twigs and the heavy, uneven breathing of the undead. The woods closed in around him, the darkness thick and oppressive, the metallic scent lingering, as if the forest itself were a tomb. Mike's breaths came in ragged gasps, his mind racing with terror and disbelief. He'd lost everything, his friend, his chance at a way out, and now he was running from the only piece of his past left. The twisted, shambling figure of his best friend transformed into a monster. He broke through the trees, stumbling onto a dirt road, his legs barely holding him up. He looked back, half expecting to see Evan still following, his undead form closing in. There was nothing, just the silent, empty forest, dark and still. Mike sank to his knees, his body trembling, his breaths coming in shallow, shaky bursts. He was free, but he knew he'd never truly escape. Evan's lifeless eyes, the twisted grin, the blood-streaked face would haunt him forever. He'd come here for a big payday, to prove something to himself, to chase a thrill and an easy reward, but all he'd found was horror, a darkness that would follow him long after he left these woods. And somewhere in the shadows the monkeys watched, their dark eyes gleaming, their work complete, the twisted game still in play.